My favorite occupational phrase is doing, being, becoming, and belonging.
We've just become a very individualist society, and we just really want everything to be in a box the way we really want it to be considered normal.
This isn't a small problem. This is the biggest societal level problem. 4 police officers holding down my limbs and somebody injecting me with ketamine, which then gave me the most horrendous hallucinations and delusions. Those of us who are living in Western society have been socialized to think of occupation in very capitalist terms. Occupy, being a productive, revenue-generating person in society.
I was fascinated by it because having that purpose in life and really knowing what you want to do, and also being happy in that, finding that being busy and having that routine. So hi, thank you so much for meeting with me today. My name is Ishaa, and I in awe of all the work that you do with ISPS US organization, and as well as some of the things that you have shared with me earlier on about why exactly you're doing this advocacy work. And I would just love if you could also share about your story and how exactly you came to be doing what you are doing right now and what inspires you the most about the work you do. But I know it's a lot of questions in the beginning, but could just introduce yourself. I'm so excited to be having this meeting with you, and thank you so much for meeting. So, yeah.
So I'm Leah Georgini, and I'm the Executive Director of ISPS US, which is an acronym standing for the International Society of Psychological and Social Approaches to Psychosis. And I lead the US chapter, along with a very talented team of volunteer board members and staff. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I'm also a person with lived experience of being within the mental health system, which is what led me to being in this field.
So if for someone who has not heard of the term occupational therapist, if you could shed some light on that.
Sure, yeah. I think especially is a bit confusing to Americans to why an occupational therapist is working in mental health. I'm English, as you can probably tell by my accent. And in England, occupational therapy is embedded in basically all mental health teams in every mental health hospital. And since we have nationalized healthcare, that means every mental health team in every hospital, since it's organized by the government. So an occupational therapist in mental health, it's similar to physical health. So the whole point of occupational therapy is to support people through the roles and occupations and things in their life that give them meaning and allow them to live independently or as independently as possible. So that could include work, it can include study, it could be being a parent, it could be dressing yourself, living independently, it's hobbies, and all the roles and things that you do in your life that give you a sense of being yourself. So my favorite occupational phrase is doing, being, becoming, and belonging, which shows the chain of the things that you do end up being who you are and end up being your place in society. So as a mental health occupational therapist, and I particularly specialized in psychosis, some examples could be supporting somebody who has perhaps been long-term institutionalized to think about, dream about, and then doing living independently when they have been in high care facilities for a lot of their life. Or it could be working with someone with first episode psychosis whose education has been disrupted by their experiences to get back into education, or somebody who may be experiencing terrible side effects of medication like weight gain and lethargy, decide if they're continuing that medication, how they can work with that and still exercise and live a healthy lifestyle, like maybe how to manage your voices in the gym and things like that. So I hope that gives some example of the different things that OT can focuses on and achieve. But it's very psychosocial, and it's not about diagnoses. It's really about what is it that gives you purpose, what things you want to do, and how can we support you to get there, or how can we adapt your environment or the people around you to get that to happen.
So a lot of the themes that you did mention, being a person with lived experience in psychosis, I could say, oh yes, I have experienced that. For example, the gap in education and also going through weight gain, lethargy, being on certain medications that causes all that, and then actually coming out of it. And I don't know the exact term which would be the the translation for that occupation in Canada. But I know for me, something that roles that mentors that I have helped have been in my college, where it has been an academic counselor with the ALS services, with the accessibility learning services. So we basically had a learning strategist, which would help with studies, and then a counselor, and then a accessibility consultant, which would help with accommodation. So I see bits and pieces of that in your role, and it's so interesting to me that you are basically using this role to kind of help people in your role as an occupational therapist, because it's so full encompassing. And I like the fact that you said that it's not really through a very like medical model kind of aspect, because at the end of the day we all need a purpose. And I wonder what your views about the whole term and concept of Ikigai was, and if you could like shed some light on that, about that, the Japanese principle, which I came to know about maybe like a few years ago. I had read the book a while back when my father introduced me to it, but I was fascinated by it, because even now what you mention is kind of echoed in that, about like having that purpose in life and like really knowing what you want to do, and also being happy in that, like finding that being busy and having that routine, because I think a lot of us struggle with that, especially with, I know I struggle with it too at times, because especially when you have a more of an abstract life. And I know a lot of artists who do deal with this about scheduling. So I guess what would your advice be to someone who would like to make their life more organized, more purposeful, and create more meaning in it? And how can we kind of step out of our silos, where we are kind of this individualistic society, and kind of make it more meaningful in terms of interacting with community? And I mean, you're doing that with ISPS US already. You're bringing people, like-minded people together. But yeah, so.
Yeah, when you talk about occupation, I think even as occupational therapists, the importance of occupation is something we have to be mindful of, because I think we all, those of us who are living in Western society, have been socialized to think of occupation in very capitalist terms, in that the way to be meaningfully occupied is through work and being a productive, a revenue generating person in society. And I don't think that's always the case. So it's really about understanding what's important to a person. Of course, we all need to live. We all need to find a way to create an income, or generate an income, or receive an income to live. We need to eat, we need somewhere to live. But I especially I've seen young people who've, education's been disrupted, their life path has been disrupted. Maybe they'd always thought they'd be an architect or a lawyer or a doctor, and the stress of maybe going for an occupation like that has caused them to become unwell, or to have a break of some kind. And I've seen people, and it's something I've wrestled with myself. Like I always had, I'm an Indonesian background, so the Asian mother of, you must be a doctor, Leah, you must be a doctor. My sister was going to be a lawyer. So that was very drummed into me. So when we're talking about supporting people with occupation, we just have to be clear on what that is and where this expectation is coming from. That said, I think a lot of us who have been through psychosis, or what is termed serious mental illness, have found times where unoccupied, we're reeling from what's happened to us. Maybe we're in a position now to think about, well, what's next? What am I doing? And I think it's very normal to have a period of inactivity where we're just processing what's occurred. Like, who am I now post this? What is my life going to look like? That narrative I've had of my life is not going to be that way anymore. Like the journey I thought I would have, the smooth sailing journey, it isn't going to happen. Maybe I'm not going to meet the expectations that others have put upon me. So I also want to say there's nothing wrong with that either. And that's something that I've learned through interactions with others at ISPS US too, like the concept of negative symptoms and what that means. It can be a very understandable response to what we have been through. That said, I think there are ways that we can start to input more structure in our lives, to make things a bit more predictable, to make things more energizing for us to start working towards the things that we want to do. And I think it starts with just figuring out what that person's values are and what is of importance to them, and working towards that value space, whether that's focusing on a caring role that someone has, like if they're a parent or pet care, sometimes it's easier to start with helping others or a volunteer job in the community. That can be something that's really useful. Looking at the basics, like making sure you're eating okay, you're getting enough sustenance for your body, you're getting enough sleep for your body, and not too much sleep either. So making sure that you're kind of trying to get your rhythms in line with daylight. Those things are often a really good first step because they're the really basic needs that we have as human beings in the world.
So I wanted to ask you something that I related to myself with having that lived experience. And I'm sure you must have also run across this in your work, both as an occupational therapist as well as your role with ISPS US. We have had these experiences where we have trauma linked to certain experiences that take place when we get hospitalized. And I was not talking a lot about this in the beginning, when I started this advocacy, but I realized that these are narratives that are important to be talked about and shared about because you also have, like, you're in this role. What are your exactly views on certain medical emergencies that get treated in a way of using methods such as isolation for patients, which are still being used in North America and in other parts of the world as well, I'm sure, including India. So what is your viewpoint on this, and is it really deemed necessary, and why does it still take place when there's so much trauma and I guess PTSD attached to it? There's so much post-traumatic stress that I have gone through because of this, because I know there's a lot of memories that kind of, while it's happening, sometimes you don't really clearly remember, and then it all comes back to you. And like you said, it shifts that narrative of your life. You've been through a certain experience, and then you go through certain things which you can't just share with everyone because of that self-stigma. You think, what will people think about this if you share this with people? But I kind of, for myself, what I tried to do is I wanted to flip that on its, I just wanted to flip it and just purposely talk more about it, because I thought to myself, if we talk more about it, we could try to find answers as to why it's taking place and what we could do as a community to try to maybe find alternative methods to help patients cope with these situations, and not in a way that kind of perpetuates that trauma for a patient, because really we're going to the hospital to heal, and to view these places as a place of healing, I think using these methods is a bit counterproductive. But that's my take on it. But I just
Very good take.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the term self-stigma, which always really interests me. My master's degree was actually in self-stigma and how that shows up in occupation in people diagnosed with psychosis. It's an interest for me because it's something that I had to grapple with myself as a young person who experienced an episode of psychosis and spent many years in the mental health system. Being hospitalized is without a doubt one of the most traumatizing experiences someone can go through. And I also think you can say, it's not a lie in the slightest to say that psychiatric human rights violations are probably some of the worst human rights violations that are being perpetuated by the state that no one seems to care about. Or people do care about it. I think there's an increasing amount of awareness about this issue. And I think we are due a civil rights reckoning like we have had with race, like we've had with gender. I think it's coming for the mental health movement too. So I have had deeply traumatic experiences receiving care. I had to move to the US to have the worst possible experiences, but it's not to say things are great in the UK either. I remember not too long after moving to the US, being in a mental health crisis. I'm sure you can relate, Ishaa, as somebody who's immigrated, like the culture shock.
Yeah.
That you don't even expect you might have because maybe you visited the countries before, you're familiar with Western countries. I was definitely familiar with America, but I was going through a whole lot of changing my whole life, losing my friendship groups. I wasn't working at the time. Anyway, ended up in a mental health crisis, which ended up me being pinned down, prone to a bed with 4 police officers holding down my limbs and somebody injecting me with ketamine, which then gave me the most horrendous hallucinations and delusions as a result of the ketamine that I've ever had. And it took me a very long time to get over the trauma of the hallucinations I experienced. I had to move to America for that joy, thanks. And it didn't need to happen. In my case, if someone had just sat there and spoken to me and empathized with me and believed me what I was going through, then I might have gone with them. I wasn't violent. I wasn't hurting anybody. I just didn't want to go anywhere with, a room full of policemen yelling at me. We need compassion in mental health services, not coercion. And especially in the United States, I don't know about Canada, maybe you can educate me, but especially in the US, we're seeing an increase in coercive methods to address things that are clearly very social. So there's a terrible homeless problem in a lot of states in the US, for instance, California. Lots of street homelessness, and a lot of those people are grappling with mental distress and with substance abuse issues. The solution there should not be coercing people into hospitals or treatment, which will end up being forced medication, because that's what treatment is. The solution there should be housing first, which is an evidence-based approach to get people into housing first and then offer voluntary support after you've built trust with a person. But we don't want to invest in that like bottom up. We just want to coerce people, and it's going to end up with people not trusting services and not engaging in services. And again, a revolving door of people being forced into treatment. Then they're running away from treatment, and then they're going to end up in bad social situations again, like being homeless or using drugs to self-medicate. Because who wouldn't use drugs if you're living on the street and terrified? I certainly would. It's completely counterproductive. So we definitely need to talk about this more. And as clinicians, we need to also talk about if you are a clinician, we need to talk about our role in that and what are we perpetuating. That said, I don't want to make out that I'm a total abolitionist when it comes to mental health treatment. I believe that coercion, hospitalization, forced treatment is far, far overused, cause way more harm than it heals. And as I said, it's an incredible human rights violation. But I don't think you can get away from that all the time, because I also want to honor people's voices that have been through forced treatment and have been grossly harmed by it. But I also want to uplift the voice of people who said, actually, I'm grateful for being hospitalized because I may have died without that, or I don't know, my life would be without that. And I've heard both stories. Like, both of these are truths, but that doesn't stop me from being deeply critical of forced treatment. And we need to invest so much more in alternatives, because should be an absolute last resort in extreme risk situations, not as a default strategy to support the most vulnerable people.
I think I want to just take a second and moment of silence to soak in what you just said, everything, all of it. Because I have witnessed myself a lot of people, and that's when I really question the relevance and the importance of actually using this method. Because I remember at that time I was in a hospital here in Toronto, and this was during COVID. So I have had coercion used on me by the medical, by nurses. So I had like my wrists and ankles tied down. Couple of occasions. Spent about maybe like 4 to 5 nights separately in isolation for different reasons. And again, I was not being violent. From what I do recall, there was a time where, of course, maybe I was not like getting my rest or sleep, but there are different ways to deal with those things. You talk to the person, or we have to find alternative methods to not really increase the trauma for the patients who are going through it. And I think what got to me the most was when I saw elderly individuals who are actually already at a disadvantage because they are under the influence of drugs, alcohol, and other substance abusers, and they're being dragged there like that, including homeless people. I saw them being pushed into that room, and my heart just sank, because that I knew what that room looked like. I had been there before in that same time when I was there. And it's just a rock solid bed, but I don't trigger warning. It's just a rock solid bed with this, and the bathroom was right there. They had a camera there, and this is Canada we're talking about. So yes, I experienced all these things when I moved from India to here. And to think, yes, a lot of things do happen as well. and do continue to take place all over the world, including in India. I have been fortunate to not experience that in India. I have had maybe one time where I was like in a rehab there, and that was maybe about like a decade ago. But I did not experience such coercion. And I think that these seeds have kind of been sowed in if you see in our cultural differences in our community, they kind of go back to how we've just become a very like individualist society, and we just really want everything to be in a box the way we really want it to be considered normal. So anything that is kind of like different from that, it freaks people out. And then we make these rules and laws, and we try to convince ourselves that we're doing this for the benefit of the society, when in fact I think it's just plain discrimination. And I don't know if they're really doing it to kind of purposely, of course, like with the full intention of like hurting people or give trauma to people. But sometimes I think they themselves don't realize what really it is that they're doing and the kind of repercussions it can have on people who experience these things. So I guess my question here is, how much of a gap do you see between people who are actually going through this, who have gone through this, emerged from this, doing advocacy, and the medical establishment? Do we have a way to reach out to them? And I know ISPS US does do a lot of conferences, print journals, and everything, and webinars, but how can we really reach out to this medical community to really make voices heard and really make that impact into policy? And because at the end of the day, we know that it's always a micro and macro approach, right? Whatever we do in our advocacy is the micro, and the macro is what takes place in policy. How can we find a way to bridge that gap and make change happen? So I guess that's my question. Yeah.
People might call me an idealist here, but I'm actually very hopeful about that, because having been working in mental health teams myself and being a clinician, I don't see it so much as an us versus them situation. I really think, and call me naive if you want to, I really think the vast majority of people working in mental health care are there because they care about people and they want to help heal people. The issue is that a lot of what people have been taught is counter to achieving that aim, or the systems that people find themselves working in don't allow them to work truly therapeutically with somebody. And that could be, very obvious rights abuses like you're describing, like being tied down, like I described being forcibly injected when other things hadn't been tried first. These are very clear rights abuses. But the system isn't set up well for people. I don't want to just badmouth the US. I worked in the UK. The National Health Service is fantastic. I fully believe in socialized medicine, but you can't get long-term depth-orientated therapy on the NHS. You'll be very lucky to get 6 weeks of CBT following along with a trainee and a workbook on CBT. That might be what you could expect as therapy. And that works for some people. And I'm not bashing CBT. I'm not bashing workbooks. I mean, everything has its place, but you're not going to get the kind of depths of therapy that I ended up receiving and ended up being really helpful for me through that existing system. I was not fortunate, I guess. My mother had passed away and I had inheritance money, which I used some of that to help pay for private therapy. And I really don't know where I'd be without having found such a great therapist to help me walk through that. And you asked me earlier about kind of a little bit about how do you go from being a patient and maybe experiencing self-stigma to moving forward to where you're advocating and doing well. Well, I want to kind of give a shout out to my therapist, Sandy, who worked with me when I was 17, 18, going on 19 years old, psychodynamic therapist. Because one thing she really did for me was to reframe some of my experiences from a me problem, like, something faulty with me or faulty with my brain, or even a problem in my family, like, oh, you experienced trauma because of domestic violence that I witnessed, my mother being a victim of domestic violence. She flipped it from just that individual problem or in a family problem to actually, this is a feminist issue. This is a social issue. gender-based violence is a systematic issue. Harming oneself as a young woman is a feminist issue because we're not allowed to express anger, so therefore we harm ourselves. All of these things helped me realize this isn't a small problem. This is the bigger societal level problem. And that got me activated to want to change society for the better, to be more equal, for women to have equal rights, for women to be able to express their anger, for men to be able to express their vulnerability, and for systems to improve. So, people don't end up homeless because we have plentiful, affordable housing for people. All of these things matter when it comes to mental health care.
I do agree with everything that you said, because I can not really agree. I mean, I don't want to use that word, but I can relate with a lot of that, because for me, what really helped a lot is when I look back to my therapist, and in this case, I do also consider myself fortunate that I had that support in the family. Because I know recently I did speak to someone, and they did tell me, that you're lucky that you had support from your father to kind of, access the therapy out there. And I have had my doctor, Dr. Sachs, who's been treating me since maybe it's around the same age you said, around 16, 17. He's known me since then, and I still consult with him. And his whole idea is that the collaborative care system approach, right? Where you have people in the community to kind of, where they're your go-to people. You reach out to them when there's something. And I think we often think that it's only the medicines and that's the biggest misconception. Like you rightly said, people who are in the system there are there because they really want to be there. A lot of the workers are overworked, burnt out, being paid not enough for the work that they do. And sometimes they don't feel that appreciated. There's no decent pay and wages for them. And I know this because I'm an early childhood educator. So I do come from that sort of care sector. I know like medical and nurses is different, but we have a similar, union and everything. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is when people do not feel appreciated, there is that the kind of stress kind of increases. But what you said about them really wanting to be there because they want to make a difference in people's lives, I do agree with that. Because, and I can give you an example of it. It was probably, I never used to really like the food much there. And of course, there's a lot of cultural differences with the food. So it was, I think, my time to take medicine in the middle of the night. And I had this one nurse come to me, still remember her name, and I will say it, not her last name, but her name was Sadie, and she came there and she gave me this like whole spread of food. And it was a small act of kindness, but it's something that was not forgotten till today. Because she told me, she said, I know you must have not eaten because I know you don't really like the food that is served. So she got a little, and it wasn't like this like incredible like bread or anything, but even those little things, it felt in the moment, it felt like I was being cared for. And I think she went out of her way to make it seem that, I'm here for you. And this is my way of showing that. Apart from all the medication and whatever injection that I did have to take. But I think definitely the care sector, including nursing and some doctors, even doctors. I had this one time where there was a doctor that took care of me. I can say his name. I should. One Dr. Adam Taska, he actually, because I was going through all this, like I guess he noticed that I needed to be, calmed and grounded in the moment. So he actually prescribed and now when I look back at this, it makes me really smile, because at that time I felt like it was this incredible thing. So he's like, I'm going to prescribe you not a pedicure, but a little tub for your feet. So he would prescribe me Epsom salt for the little bucket, and the nurse would actually bring that, and I felt like, and so these kind of little things that really go a long way, even things like doing therapeutic activities such as doing painting and artwork, and giving space to, really do my yoga, which I did when I was in the place. But this was the same place where I did experience the isolation. So there are pros and cons. And then I too am very hopeful. I'm positive about this. And I think that journey and that shift from looking at it through a negative lens, I realized, and I really have my father to thank for this too, is that you kind of, the more, I guess, the more negative you are, that's more everything you see. But if you really try to like look at everything, even the darkest and the most dramatic thing
Right.
through that positive lens, not only do you spread that, but you attract that, you know? So
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I also don't want to discount there are people working in the
I
mental
don't.
health system that are should not be there, that are on some kind of power trip, seem to get off harming people or exerting control and power over others. That exists in all
Yeah.
fields,
Yeah.
but in fields where somebody can wield power, the wrong people can be attracted to that. That definitely exists. I don't want to make out like, oh, everybody is sunshine and rainbows
No,
working in
no.
the mental health field. That's not true. I don't
No,
want to
no,
put
no.
that. But I think what you just described shows really what we're talking about, what the important thing is. The important thing for healing and recovery isn't necessarily the medication. Medication can help some people. I'm not anti-medication. I still take some, not nearly as much as I used to, but I still take
Yeah.
some psychiatric medication. Partly because I don't think I can ever get off it. I just think
Yeah.
it's very hard to get off medications
Yeah.
because of the withdrawal symptoms. But partly, I mean, it has helped me. I will say that. I will come out and say medication has helped me. But medication can also harm people at the same time. And there is horrible polypharmacy, overprescribing, particularly in the US. I've never seen anything as shocking as some of the lists of medication that I've seen prescribed to people in the US. It does happen in the UK too, but man, does it seem to happen more often in the US. People on disgustingly huge doses of multiple medications that are harming them. But my point is that what you've described is what's really important is human connection. You're describing somebody caring enough for you to give you food because they've noticed that you might be hungry, or somebody giving you preferred food. I remember as a support worker, not long after I come out of hospital myself, working in the field, bringing someone from an Asian background some jasmine tea in hospital because all they had was British tea and they didn't like British tea. They wanted jasmine tea. So I went to the Chinese supermarket, got them jasmine tea and brought it to them and sat there and we made tea together and just chatted. I'm not saying that I was the reason they were cured, but there's moments like that are moments we remember as patients. People have been kind to me before in treatment too, but we also remember as clinicians, like those are the moments where you really connect with people. You don't connect with people by convincing them to take their medication. That should not be the reason that you exist. The reason you're providing therapy should not be to convince people they're sick and they need meds. The reason that you provide therapy or you're providing a mental health service to someone is to connect with them, to understand what they're going through, and to offer them hope of what could come next. I think most people want that, but they've forgotten or the system doesn't allow them to reach for that.
Yeah, I got reminded of an experience I had where it was one of the times where I was going to be discharged by the doctor, but my mother felt that I was not ready to come home. I did not have like my money and my cards, and I was in the hospital. And but I did express to the doctor that I really do feel like wanting to go home and I feel that I'm ready. And they considered it and they wanted to discharge me. And actually, my mom felt that I should not come home and she was talking to the doctor and everything. And so she refused to give me money to go home. You know, she was like, I'm not gonna get the cab. I think you should take that time and everything. And in that moment, it was frustrating. I know she was looking out for me, but it was actually the hospital who booked a cab for me to go back home. And I can't believe this part was not in my memoir because I mean, there was a lot of things I didn't really include in there, you know, to really, really protect family and whatnot. But I think now we've come to terms with a lot of the things that took place. We've all had time to really process those things. And especially me and my mom, because we know that relationship, we loved each other so much. We still love each other so much. We work together as well. But it's just that moment was so critical for me where I actually felt like the system is looking out for me. And I sat in that cab and I went home and it was all paid for by the hospital and the government. And it's not about the money really. It's really about the support that in that moment that I felt that, okay, you know, that I can also take agency in my healing process. And I think sometimes a lot of patients also forget that they can also try to, you know, have their voice and say in their path of healing. And it can get challenging. I know sometimes there have been times in my life too where I kind of just go with the flow, and where I went with the flow and just did whatever was told to me to do, you know. But to really find that voice where there's so much stigma and that self stigma as well. And I guess coming back to the stigma topic, and you know how you said you did your master's and you explored that, was there any chance that you may have also explored Irving Goffman in any sense with stigma? And if you wanted to like share something about that, he might have said.
I didn't look at
Yeah.
Gotham specifically, but obviously
Okay.
the topic of stigma as a whole I looked at, and then at self-stigma. And there's actually a few ISPS US members who I quoted heavily in my master's degree, and they know who they are because I tell them regularly. But it's
Oh,
been
wonderful.
kind of coming around
Yeah.
full circle, to now work and with people that I have looked up to,
Quoted.
quoted and looked up to, and read their
Incredible.
research and found it very useful.
So
And then people
incredible.
who've this year we were just reviewing conference proposals who've proposed workshops. Like, oh my gosh, I know who you are. I know your work on stigma. It's very, very cool. I will share this on stigma though. I will share this because this comes up a lot at ISPS US, is terminology and what people call their experiences. So I know over just the course of this interview, I've used the word psychosis. Some people might use the word schizophrenia. Some people might call their experiences spiritual awakenings, or dangerous gifts is one that we hear. So there's many different ways to describe what a person experiences. And if we're thinking about stigma, I completely hear people that feel that medicalized terminology like schizophrenia or psychosis, for example, can perpetuate the biomedical model and perpetuate stigma.
Yeah.
However, I really believe that any word we use will end up being associated with stigma. We could change the name of psychosis and call it something else. And once society is aware of that phrase and knows what we're referring to, that will become the newly stigmatized phrase. So I don't think there's any getting away from stigma in language. And I also deeply believe that people should be able to describe their experiences in the terms that best fit them. So I don't subscribe personally to a lot of the illness-related languages or disability related languages, for example, at least not now in this part of my journey. I tend to use the word psychosis because it's the most easily understood way to describe what I'd been through, which was paranoia and confusion and everything. But I think we should hold that people, I'm quite an existentialist person, so I think people have to make meaning of the things they go through. They have to make their own meaning in life, and whatever meaning they find that is helpful to them is something that we should support. Also, some people may latch on to a schizophrenia diagnosis, for example, and that comes with a lot of self-stigmatizing belief for them, and therefore maybe it's not a helpful way for them to identify. But for others, it's a way of reclaiming their identity or reclaiming a diagnosis and being like, I'm schizo, so what? I mean, there's just different ways of internalizing this. So since we're on the top of a stigma, I just kind of want to put that out there, that I think all ways of describing one's experiences are valid, and nobody should be telling someone else how they should identify. Not someone with lived experience, not a clinician. We should be working towards it and understanding why that's helpful for them and how that helps them to understand themselves.
So I really wanted to kind of just comment on the part you talked about identity. So recently I was introduced, actually, it's been about a year, I was introduced to the concept of MAD studies through my supervisor at that time, Dr. Adam W.J. Davies. And they were a university professor at Guelph. I was extremely inspired by their work, and I realized a lot of my journaling and my writing and a couple of my poems that I did do in my memoir was in a way me expressing that into like that poetry and that. And so when I looked up this term and really what it meant, and these kind of the group of scholars who were associating with it, and that whole concept of saneism and the othering of people who are diagnosed with disabilities. I found myself identifying with being mad, and I felt at ease with that. So I do like to use that term. I like we were just mentioned using identifiers, and you're right, because who are we to say that you shouldn't be using this term or that term. And no matter what term is used, yes, I do 100% agree with you that at the end of the day, it will be to some extent stigmatized by the society, because it is so deeply rooted and entrenched in what has been happening for generations. I mean, if you look at the history, it is so dark. There have been so many cases of people just being sent away for their experiences and their entire lives. I mean, I recently went to meet one of my counselors at another college here in Toronto, and I went to their campus, and I literally got shivers up my spine because they had this exhibition just below honoring the individuals who actually were in that facility. There was a letter written by one of the patients there who was around 16 years of age at that time, and it in the records it stated that she had spent actually her entire life there. And it was a letter she was writing to her mom, saying that give my love to brother, give my love to the neighbors, and her way of wanting to communicate. And of course, at that time, it was through letters and through post. So there was an actual copy of that letter up there, and I realized, in a way, also going back to what you said earlier about being positive about where we're headed as a society when it comes to processing diagnosis and psychosis. I do believe, yes, that we have made progress and we are making progress, and the path ahead is definitely better than what it was, and we're headed towards somewhere. And that somewhere is, I think, definitely better than what it was. So
humanity has hope. I mean,
yes,
like I say, in the US right now, there's a lot to talk about with the US, but I'll just focus on
yeah.
the topic because I don't want to get political. Like
No.
the increase in coercive care, for example, one could say things are as bad now as they've ever been, and that's true. But I really believe that people are starting to become more aware of psychiatric rights as human rights. And I think what you were saying about mad studies, mad pride, mad culture, that's really the crux of the issue, right? Like, we can get distracted by things like language and fighting amongst ourselves, pointing fingers. You shouldn't use medicalized language, or you shouldn't use the disability language. I mean, people are it's not disability, it's a gift. Like, we can fight amongst each other, but the real crux of the issue is what you're talking about, is this othering of people with differences, people who are mad, or however you want to describe it. We've seen great shifts in understanding of neurodiversity, for example.
Yeah.
And there's lots of critique around that too. But if you're looking at it from a positive aspect, people are like, oh yeah, autism, it's just, everybody's on the spectrum, or autism diagnosis, or people are getting diagnosed now, they're getting support, they're getting help. We're recognizing that everybody's different, some people function differently. We could lend the same understanding to people who hear voices, for instance. If society, for example, understood that voice hearing or seeing things or these experiences, if they saw that as just part of the human experience, that's when we'll reduce stigma. I don't think it's by changing the name. I think it's about really understanding that this is what makes us human, is distress, is sensory differences, seeing things that aren't there, perceiving things that aren't there, or having stages of your beliefs maybe not being completely part of reality. If we see that as being the human experience, then that's when we'll tackle stigma. However, I don't want to say that, what's happening with ADHD and autism is 100% great, because I also think that there is great pharmaceutical influence on there that is trying to make just normal experiences pathologicalized. I think I'm on the algorithm for this stuff. So I'll be on Instagram or something, and there'll be a reel that comes up that says, how do you know you're ADHD without saying you're ADHD? And it's like, oh, you walk into a room and you forget why you're there. I don't think you need to have ADHD to walk into a room and forget why you're there. Yes, that could be an experience of someone who has ADHD, but it's also just part of being human. So who's pushing this narrative that we're all neurodiverse, and then it's the next step that's the problem, and therefore we need medication. Medication can help some people, but I'm skeptical about the kind of normalization which isn't really normalization. What is actually is pathologicalization. So I want us to understand psychosis as a normal human experience, but I don't want that to then be everybody's on antipsychotics because everybody might hear their phone ringing and their phone isn't ringing. You know what I mean? Like there are things that are normal, like I think my phone's buzzing in my pocket and it's not, or I hear my voice being called and it's not. That should be normalized. It shouldn't then be everybody needs Zyprexa. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. I feel like at the end of the day, yes, everybody's experiences are neurodiverse, but that definitely doesn't mean that we need to start labeling every little difference that we think is not conforming to our definition and notion of normality, and suddenly start subscribing medication for each and every little thing. I don't think there is an end to that. Yes, we really as individuals, as advocates, as clinicians, as whoever, we need to really as a society draw a line between really like what really needs that in that moment, that medication or whatever, and where we're really just overdoing this thing. I think a lot of that is kind of tied down with, of course, with politics, with the economy, and also with that, with the greed and wanting to just make money of instilling fear in people. But that's a topic for another day, I think. Yeah, like there's something wrong with you. You have to take this medication.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, everybody just, I'm so happy that we finally got to have this conversation. And I'm sure that there's so many more topics to actually explore. But thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you today, Ishaa.
Yes, and see you soon.